Just a few days ago, One Piece became the most sold comic in existence. Where comic book series like Spider-Man, Superman, Batman were written by multiple writers over the course of a very long time, One Piece was written by only one guy in just under 30 years. One Piece manga debuted in 1998, but it had some beta versions which were not finalized form of One Piece, but they were still One Piece. Luffy was introduced in a series called Wanted before One Piece, and that Wanted was a foundation, or you might say a base, for the actual One Piece manga. One Piece became the most sold comic book in history. That is not a small feat, especially for a non-English comic book. The question is, how did this 600 million copies sold figure came from, and how does this work? Even though this is not a main part of this video, I will still explain why One Piece took over such big IPs like Superman, Spider-Man and Batman. But before going into that, we will discuss about how volumes sold are calculated. Every professional book is published under a publishing company, and for One Piece, that was Shonen Jump or Shueisha. Suppose this is a local library and it sells manga. There are manga series like Jujutsu Kaisen, Kagurabachi, Boruto and One Piece. Since One Piece is more popular than these IPs, One Piece will be given more copies, or the owner of this library will bring or will buy more One Piece volumes than the other ones because they sell more. How does this library get the One Piece manga? From a publishing company. So the library asks the publishing company to give them more books, and the company keeps record of those books. And that is how physical volume sales are counted, because you cannot count individual copies, since there are billions and millions of library stores all over the world. But there is only a handful of publishing companies. But the publishing companies are not dumb either. They won't mass produce a manga that is not successful. So how do they decide that the manga is successful or not? Yes, they take the data from those local libraries. They ask for the sale data, and after analyzing the sale data, they know which manga series we have to produce in mass and which manga series we have to produce less so that we can make a profit. Let us consider 4 mangas: One Piece, Jujutsu Kaisen, Kaiju number 8 and Kagurabachi. Among these 4 mangas, Kaiju number 8 and Kagurabachi are not as much as popular like One Piece and Jujutsu Kaisen. So they are not demandful enough. So the publishing company will make less copies of those manga than the One Piece and the Jujutsu Kaisens because they are the big shot. So that is how they count volume sales and manages their productions. But don't get confused. The 600 million figure represents the volume sold, not volumes produced. But you guys might ask, what about the magazine sales? One Piece is a weekly series, and there are many series like One Piece which are released weekly, and typical weekly mangas are 15 to 16 pages long. So Shonen Jump will compile all of those newly released chapters into a singular book, and that book is called Shonen Jump Magazine. For One Piece at least, different publications have different names. Those are magazine sales. Those are not volume sales. Volumes are batches of 10 to 12 chapters. So what are the differences between the chapters released in the magazine and in the manga? Since the magazine chapters were released weekly, there are some minute problems and mistakes. Those are corrected and put into the volume. So volume is the final version of the weekly release chapters. This is a double-edged sword. This weekly nature of this series helps it to be relevant all the time. But since it was already released weekly and people have already bought the Shonen Jump magazine, not many people buys the actual volume if they are weekly readers. But if they are new readers, they have no other way except reading the volumes released. Now let us talk about another topic, that is online piracy and digital copies. Online platforms like Manga Plus and Viz Media has the digital version of One Piece manga weekly. So if you are not from Japan and the weekly released magazines are not available in your area, you can get the weekly chapters from these platforms. Majority of the manga readers are from this digital media. Not everyone has the luxury of storing 100 volumes of a series in a room, and the digital copies are much cheaper than that of the physical copies. And piracy is a issue of its own, because if you check every pirated manga sites, you will always see One Piece at top. Just imagine the potential of One Piece if it was available everywhere.